Okay. We're ready.
Uh, Later, Cassie, the last 7 years of her life, she had a great deal of trouble with her heart and blood clots and things of that kind, and she didn't dare do much. She didn't get out. And Ruby and I used to go up, and the only time she would get out would be on Sunday afternoon. And for 7 straight years, every Sunday afternoon, we took her out for a ride, and believe me, I know every back road in Wabash County and all the surrounding counties from taking her, trying to find new places. And that might sound to you as though it was a terrific burden on me. And it never was a burden on me to take Cassie anywhere. I have never known anybody. When she was terribly ill, she never talked about her own illness. She was always asking about other people and asking how they were getting along and interested in other things. And frankly, I looked forward to Sunday afternoon taking her out somewhere. And I don't know, this may be bragging a little bit, but the greatest compliment I ever received was from her. She kind of grinned one time and she said, you know, when I was young, I remember a lady who said, you know, I think that for everything bad I have ever done, the devil has paid me off in a son-in-law. And Cassie looked at me and said, John, I want to tell you now, whatever good I've ever done in the world, I feel that God has paid me. And I trace her that a great deal.
Yes.
But she, in many ways, she was like my mother in the idea of doing good for people. That was the chief thing. She was, of course, she was a Dunkard, and there were comparisons between the Dunkards and the Quakers, but they were very different. Well, to go back, I went down to Kokomo. We started the junior college there. It was the depths of the Depression. We started because we couldn't get a job anywhere else. And one advantage of it was we got quite a faculty there. I taught English and speech. I think I taught European history for a while, too. Everett Turbyville, his father was the Methodist minister in Kokomo. He was a graduate of Penn College in Iowa and had a master's degree from Clark University and a great deal of very fine background. By the way, he later, when he left 4 years later, he went with Procter & Gamble, went very high in industrial relations, and about 5 years later, he went with Upjohn and he was Upjohn's vice president in charge of industrial relations. So, you know, he was quite a man. Smartest man I was ever around, I'll tell you. He taught economics and psychology and American history. Vic Hovey taught physics and chemistry, and he had a master's degree. I forget where it was from. He was an interesting fellow. But probably the most educated of the whole outfit was Sally Fonestock. Now, Sally Fonestock had a master's degree from the University of Chicago and 3 years study at the Sorbonne in Paris. And she taught mathematics. Her work was all in mathematics, but she taught mathematics and French. And if you don't think she was good, you have nothing coming. By the way, Miss Martz, who was a teacher at the high school, came over and taught German, too. So we had quite a good offering for 2 years. Not a great deal of variety, but we gave plenty for 2 years, and we managed, George talked to all the colleges, or the major colleges in the States, and they all agreed to accept our graduates and give them credit for what they had done on probation. If they made good in the college they went to, well, they got credit. If they didn't, they didn't. Well, that was as good as being accredited. And we went out trying to get students, and it wasn't all that easy. Our plug was basically that they could stay at home and go to college, and it made it a great deal cheaper. And we got, we didn't get a great many very fine students. We had some, and some of them have done very well since. Parks Thompson was head of a steel company in California, and we had a lot of teachers, and they did well. And it wasn't a pleasant time. It was a time we were terribly poor. It may give you an idea of how poor. The boys on the WPA, which was basically charity, got $65 a month. We got 50. And to live on $50 a month was quite a, but we learned how to, we got through it. Ruby and I stayed there 4 years, and then
Did this place have a name, John?
the Kokomo Junior College.
Kokomo Junior College.
We got a lot of help, some very good help. C.V. Hayworth, the superintendent of schools, helped us. And he, without him, it never could have gone at all. The YMCA helped us. We had our classrooms in the YMCA, and their physical education man was our physical education instructor. By the way, we had a basketball team, and we only had about 10 boys in school. Most of them were girls. With 10 boys in school, we had a basketball team. We played Taylor, we played Anderson, we played St. Joe. St. Joe always walloped the hell out of us, but the second year we won. We played 9 schools. I can't remember, but they were all the Taylor, St. Joe, Anderson type. And we won 16 out of 18 games. We played each school twice. I never will forget a little story. Maybe I shouldn't tell it here, but Parks Thompson was a long drink of water. He was 6'4", and he jumped center. And Francie Hessler was the tiniest basketball player I've ever seen. He wasn't over 5'4", and he was so skinny. He just looked completely drawn. But he was fast and he was good. Well, we were playing down at St. Joe, and for some reason the coach wanted to take Parks Thompson, the center, out. So he had Bob Reese jump center. He was one of the forwards, and he sent Hessler in for Reese. That was the time the old center jump after every bucket. They had done it just before the center jump. And when Hessler ran out, you can understand why the St. Joe boys thought that was all funny. Here, 6'4", goes on to about 5'4", comes in, and they all laughed. And it made Hessler mad. And the first tip-off came to the man he was guarding. And I don't know how Hessler got so high in the air, but he got up in the air, he stole that ball away from this big boy. He went under the basket, wide open. He shot at the basket, he missed it at least 10 feet. But we had our happy times too, but it was so poor. And in the spring of 36, Bob won the state high school oratorical contest, and he wanted to go to the national contest out in Oklahoma City. So Mother and I took him out, and on the way out we took a speech teacher from up somewhere around Winnemac. And he rode out with us and back, I guess. But on the way, he got to talking about a comparatively young man over at Winnemac, had been elected judge, and he thought a great deal of him. And I don't know, it was from that conversation that I got the idea that I would like to be the judge of the Wabash Circuit Court. And I don't suppose anybody ever started the law school with his mind so definitely made up of exactly what he wanted to do. And I went down to Indiana University and took a summer course there in contracts under a professor named Willis, and did pretty well with it. Willis gave a true false examination for half the examination, and I never took a true false examination yet. I didn't get a great deal better than I deserved. At any rate, Mr. Willis had never given an A in 16 years of teaching at Indiana University, but no student had ever gotten 100 on his true false. Now, it's a possible 131, I think, but nobody had ever gotten up to 100. And I cracked that baby for 122, and he gave me an A. I laughed about it later. George again took over, and he talked me into going to Harvard. He said, if you're going to go to law school, you might as well go to the best, and so I did. Went out there.
John, before we get on that, can we go back to the
Yeah.
junior college days a little bit? Was this a non-profit junior college operation? Or?
Well, we'd like to have had enough profit to pay enough salaries to live on, but no, it was a non-profit institution as far as that goes, but if there had been any profits, we'd have taken them out in salaries, certainly. We needed more than that.
Yeah. Did the thing break even finally?
It never made enough to pay decent salaries, no. It kept going for 3 or 4 years after I left. As a matter of fact, it kept going because of donations. They put it like in the United Fund, and it got quite a bit of money from that. And it managed to keep going until, I'm not sure what year it was, around 38, 9, 40 in there sometime. I was long gone then. Indiana University took it over and made it into the regional campus of Indiana University, so it's still there and it's still quite active.
Did George stay with it then after you left?
George never had anything to do with it really, except his name was, he was never there. He did in the planning, and that sort of thing. I don't mean to underrate his contribution, but his contribution was not in being in Kokomo.
Yeah.
So he never, and after I left, no, he took no interest.
You never had any boarding students then, primarily Kokomo kids?
I think 1 or 2 were from other schools, but they had people there that they came and stayed with. It was primarily just Kokomo.
Well, why don't we hold our Harvard
Okay.
experience? It's 5:30, and
Yeah, that'd be a good time to.
now we're ready.
All right. There isn't
No, I think we'll just go right on, John. As we were talking about you, George had recommended that you wanted to go to law school, and he said to go to the best, so you went to Harvard. Now let's talk about your Harvard experiences.
At that time, it wasn't hard to get into Harvard. The only requirements there were if you had graduated from an approved school, which meant an Ivy League school, you could get in with nothing further. If you were a graduate of any other college, then you had to have graduated in the upper 25% of your class, which is not too difficult. But it was in early September when Ruby and Tad, our daughter, was she would be 3 October 25th of that year, not quite 3, and the 3 of us got into a little old Model A Ford coupe that I had. We had it loaded down with everything under the sun. It was very tired. I haven't any idea how many miles it had. It was supposed to have 30,000 when I got it, and it had perhaps 60,000 by then, and I expected it had 130 when I bought it. At any rate, it had slowed down The Model A's, when new, they would get up to 70 miles an hour without any sweat. But by that time, ours was down to 45 miles an hour top, and we just started out. It was 1,025 miles to Boston. And I put my foot on the floor and let it go, and we drove long hours, and by doing that, we made it in 2 days. I'll never forget the first evening when we got to Boston. It was raining.
What year would this been, John?
1936.
Right.
It was raining when we got into Boston, and at that time it was rather the cheap way to stay all night was to go to a tourist home. So we started looking for a tourist home. And apparently they didn't know much about them around Boston because we hunted and hunted and hunted. We didn't have money enough to go to a hotel. And I don't know, it must have been 8:30 or 9 o'clock. We must have been hunting for 3 or 4 hours before we found one. We stayed in that tourist home that night, and I tried to find where it was for the next 3 years. And it was the spring of my last year before I found it again. But I remember that I've never seen such a clean place. The lady who ran that tourist home was, I thought, just stinking clean. You could have eaten off the floor anywhere. But anyway, we stayed there all night, and the next morning we drove into Cambridge, and the first thing we had to do was to get a place to stay while we looked for a place to stay. And we found an apartment in a big old home which had been turned into a whole raft of apartments. I have no idea how many people were on one toilet there, one bathroom. It was a tremendous number. It was a lousy place, but it was cheap. So the next day we started looking, and I don't know how long we looked, a couple of 3 days, and we found a place just 2 very short blocks from Harvard Square on Boylston Street. I was there a couple of years ago. The place is still there. I can't remember the name of that little side street it was on. I remember it was really it was a rough neighborhood that close to Harvard Square. I counted 17 places where you could get a drink between us and the square, which was not much over 150 yards away. And we had difficulties with drunks who would be offensive. And all in all, it wasn't much of a place, but we got it, and we had to buy furniture for it. And we went to second-hand stores and got those. And I remember the night they were to bring the furniture, they were late with it. And that was the night they were having the fireworks for the tercentenary anniversary of the founding of Harvard. It was founded in 1636. They were having a lot of fireworks down on the Charles River there. And they shut off all the streets, and this poor trucker trying to bring our stuff, and he finally talked them into letting him have 5 minutes. I've never seen anybody unload so much furniture in 5 minutes. The physical environs of Boston, of course, are widely known. The Charles River is always, ever since, has been a pleasant memory to me. It was just like a park along the river, and in the fall and the early spring we'd go down there, and I'd study, and Tad would play on the grass, and Ruby'd read or something, and we'd watch in the spring. We'd watch the shells practicing, and some of the boys out in sculls, and it's one of the nice memories that I have. Harvard was not always. We were so very poor that it wasn't always the most pleasant memory, although one thing we certainly learned was that you didn't have to have money to have fun. I might mention that the first week we were there, they had a reception for first-year students, and they told us things about the school and explained a lot of things to us, but the thing I remember the best, one of the speakers got up and he said very shortly, "I want each of you men to take a good look at the man on your right and the man on your left. For next year, only one of you three will be back. And they weren't kidding. We started with a class of between, it was almost 750. And the second year we had about 235 or 40. And we graduated about 170, so that it was that way. There was a great deal of talk about the difference between Harvard Law School and Yale Law School. Harvard would take anybody and then bust them all out. Yale, on the other hand, was extremely selective. You had to be the very best to get into the Yale Law School, but if you got in, why, you would get through. You didn't have to do anything after you got there. And I never thought either one was right. It's hard to realize what the things that happen on account of the terrific pressure on the boys. For example, in the 3 years, there was never a year when there were less than 3 attempted suicides. Now, these aren't kids. They have all graduated from college. They're men. I've seen them in the final examinations. I've seen fellows go to pieces, throw up all over the room. I've seen them wet their pants. It is unbelievable the things that the pressure did to them. And now I remember some of them. I remember Jim Jones. Jim had graduated from Annapolis. He had been the editor of the humor magazine in Annapolis, and he could tell a story pretty well. But he went into the Navy, served 7 years, and then he lost a hearing in 1 year and was retired on 2/3 pay, which was not too much in those days, and he had 4 children, but he was there trying to go to school. And less than a week before the examinations, they found his wife had tuberculosis, and he was trying to get treatment for her and so forth, and he failed. He didn't pass the examinations, and tried to come back the next year on probation, and told them what had happened, and they could not see that in any way should be considered. He had failed, and so he'd failed. That was it. I don't know what happened to Jimmy. I heard the next year he was working as an engineer somewhere, and he said at that time he had his orders in case of war, so if they carried out, he was in Milwaukee by 1942. But another fella, Red Elgin, and that always seemed to me to be that he was typical of the very thing that Harvard Law School's method was wrong for. Red had been a very good student. He'd graduated from the University of Nebraska. But he came out there and he and Jim both studied in the same group with me. You always had groups to study together. And Red never got the idea of law. And he was straining everything. He had no money. He was trying to get through, and it was a terrible sacrifice for Red. And predictably, he didn't make it. He went back to Nebraska, and for 3 years he was killed. He did nothing. He was just crushed. Then he pulled himself together, went to graduate school, and the last I heard, he was a full professor at Leland Stanford University. And yet, you can't help but think what a waste it was. There were 4 years that a highly intelligent young man completely wasted because nobody was able to tell him, you shouldn't go to law school. Now, the second year I was there, they started giving quite a battery of examinations, which meant nothing to the man who took them, but they were trying to find some correlation between success in these examinations or in each examination, see if there was any correlation between that and success in law school. Now, that doesn't mean success as a lawyer, of course, but at least it means something. And I think they did get some that they felt did have some correlation, and began to use those to weed out some of those who obviously shouldn't come. And it may be that that's the forerunner of the present LSAT tests, which keep a great many fellows out of law school, and most of them were kept out, feel it's a mistake, but nevertheless, I expect it does do a lot of good. At Harvard, there's a great deal to be said for going to a school such as Harvard. I don't think that you learn a great deal more there than you do in almost any other real good school. Any school can give you all you can learn. But there is, to me at least, I felt there was an inspiration from going to a school with a history of 300 years. There were many things there which had historic interest around the place. One which I might mention is in the very center of the Harvard yard, and I loved the yard. It was it was something different from anything I had ever seen. It's just an area about 4 blocks. That's 2 blocks wide, 2 blocks long, with a high wall around it. You have many buildings in there. The newest one, I suppose, would be the Widener Library. I don't know, that would, I expect, was built about 1920. I don't know for sure. University Hall in the very center is the oldest building, and it dates back probably about 300 years. But in front of University Hall, there's a very interesting statue. I saw a picture of it in the Marion paper last week. Some young fellow had gone to Harvard, and it showed a picture of him in front of this statue. It is called by the students the Statue of the 3 Lies. On the base it says John Harvard, founder, 1638. The 3 lies are that it isn't a statue of John Harvard. Nobody has the least idea what John Harvard looked like. Second, John Harvard was not the founder of Harvard College at all, really had very little to do with it. And third, it was founded in 1636, not 1638. I might mention that John Harvard probably got more mileage out of very little than anybody, more immortality than anybody I know of. He didn't do anything to have Harvard named for him. He died, what he did. He was a young minister in his early 30s. He got tuberculosis and died, and he had what at that time was a fairly good library. And his wife, like most of the women of the time, was completely illiterate, and she had no idea what to do with this library. And somebody suggested that she take it down and give it to the new college that had just been founded a couple of years before. So she took the library down, gave it to the college, and for some reason they, because of that, they named it Harvard College. And I thought that was about as much immortality as you could get for that.
How many, what did you, 2 things I'm going to ask is, did you work part-time while you were going to school? And the other thing is, what did you do for money? Did Ruby work?
The first year, most of the money I got from Dad, although I did, as time went on, there were briefs had to be typed for the moot court, and I got a great deal of typing. I made money from that. But most of it I borrowed from Dad, and we went on very little. I got a second, third years, I got scholarships, which helped some. And beginning about Thanksgiving of the second year, Ruby, she went down and got a job supposed to be 3 days, working, addressing direct mail advertising for a heating and plumbing firm, or heating appliances, I guess was mainly. And her 3 days lasted until we came home in the spring, and then as soon as we got back in the fall, she worked there all the rest of the time we were there, and that helped a great deal. I suspect we went through Harvard on just about as little money as anybody ever went through. It was not and a nice thing about it was that there were others in the same boat. You always had poor people you could get together with, and for example, it was a very common thing. Many times we had people in for a party. At the end of the party, we'd bring out cheese, crackers, and water, and that was the refreshments, and it was all we could afford.
Yeah.
And you know, that's not bad if you know that the other people there are going to give you cheese, crackers, and water or something similar when you go to their house. Yeah. And we came to have a great deal of pleasure out of people we met. I might mention that that's one thing, you get to see all kinds in Harvard. There were a number of them who were as poor as we were. On the other hand, I got to know fellows that were very wealthy and happened to find out after I'd known them quite a while that they had money. For example, one that I met quite early that year was Jerry O'Melveny, and the name didn't mean anything to me, and Jerry was just a boy, and he'd married a awfully nice gal, and we were friends of theirs and ran around together. I'd known him quite a while before I found out that Jerry's father was Bing Crosby's personal attorney and worth a lot of money, but Jerry wasn't spending much. He was just like the rest of us there. I don't know why. Then another one, and he was one of the biggest surprises. I should have guessed something. I asked Henry Hyde once where he went to college, and he said that he'd gone to the Sorbonne in Paris, and I asked him where his home was, and it was in Pittsburgh. And I don't know what I thought, that some poor boy out of Pittsburgh, how he got to the Sorbonne. But that winter, Brenda Fraser was the debutante of the year. She was the glamour gal of America. She was really up and amongst them. And one day I picked up a Look magazine, and there staring out at me was Brenda Fraser coming out of the Stork Club, escorted by Henry Hyde. Another boy that I met and got to know quite well, he was the same moot court team with me, and we studied together because of that. It was Dick Dupree, and Dick was from Cincinnati, Ohio. And one day I asked Dick, just making conversation, I said, "Dick, what does your dad do?" And he said, "Oh, he's with Procter & Gamble." So I said, what kind of work does he do for them? And rather apologetically, he told me his father was the president of Procter & Gamble. So you ran into that. And you remember back some of the fellows you met, some of the fellows you knew quite well, and you find that they have done some big things. I was looking up. I got a sort of a directory from the school of my class, and I noticed that Hugh Jones, who was in the same law club with me, is now the Chief Justice of the Supreme Judicial Court of New York. And Graham, what was his first name? He went down to Washington as secretary to one of the Supreme Court justices. He was the #1 man in our class. He was terrifically intelligent, and he married Catherine Meyer, whose father was the publisher of the Washington Post. And Graham became the publisher of the Washington Post and had a tremendous lot of money, tremendous lot of power, tremendous lot of everything that you would think would make a man happy. And about 10 years ago, he committed suicide, and his wife, Catherine Graham, is the publisher of the Post today, and of course has terrific power. So we did, there was a great deal of inspiration in that. Now, I don't know, just to see those old buildings, and the Harvard just kind of grew up. They didn't make it all one form of architecture. You find every kind of architecture there is there. I think the ugliest building I've ever seen is Memorial Hall, which is just outside the yard. Sits on a kind of a point between an angle between two streets that fork out. And right across the street and just inside the yard sits the Memorial Chapel. It's easy to get the names mixed up, but the Memorial Chapel, in contrast, is the most beautiful church I have ever seen. It has a spire that goes up and just seems to float up there. It gives you a feeling of weightlessness, and it's a brick, very simple colonial-style church, but to me it's simply beautiful, out of this world. I should tell one other story about the yard. I don't remember which year it was, along in the spring, Ruby and I were walking through the yard, and we noticed over in one of the old brick dormitory buildings, there were I think 3 floors, and there was a fellow up on the 3rd floor, and on the 2nd floor, a boy had gotten a basket of apples, and he'd put them outside the window to keep them cool, and the boy up above had a knife attached to a string, and he was dropping it down to see if he could spear an apple, and every once in a while he'd get one and pull it up, and we mentioned that shows how much higher education can do for one. But in the school, I think perhaps the biggest inspiration is in the faculty and in the men that you are under, the men you get to know. Now, to give an illustration of what I mean, the first year I had procedure under Professor Austin Wakeman Scott. I don't know whether Scotty knew anything about procedure any more than anybody else. I doubt if he did. But Austin Wakeman Scott was the great authority on the law of trusts. He was greater than anybody else in the law of trusts. In some way, even though you're studying something else, the fact that this man is the best there is in something gives you a great inspiration. And I got quite a kick out of Scotty, of course, the greatest inspiration and the greatest man that I've ever studied under, and he certainly was a great teacher. He's one of the 3 greatest, and I think he may have been the greatest of the 3. I don't know, was Williston. Williston occupied a position in contract law that he knew more about contracts than anybody else knew about any field of the law. He was, a little story about it, I had taken contracts at Indiana and got an A under Willis down there. I went out to Harvard, and I didn't think I should take contracts right over again, so I went to see Acting Dean Morgan. Morgan knew Willis. He had taught with him at the University of Minnesota before Willis went to Indiana and Morgan went to Harvard. And he said, well, if you had contracts under Willis, you had a good course in contracts. But he said, my feeling has always been that you learn more from the man you study under than you do from the course which you take. He said, now you're slated to study under Professor Williston this year. He said, Williston is 75 years old. We don't know how long he'll be here. He may not be here another year. His present plan is to teach all year, which he doesn't usually do. Usually he goes to Florida for 3 months. And he said, my suggestion would be, he said, you may do as you like. He said, my suggestion would be that you take contracts right over under Williston. And he said, I think you'll find it a wise decision. And he convinced me, and I took contracts under Williston. I wouldn't have missed that for the world. By the way, I got a B in that. But do I have time for a story?
Yeah, we got time on this.
One thing Williston did one time that I've never forgotten. It was fairly early in the course, and the amazing thing was that at Harvard, with as many as 150, 200 students in a class, they carried on it was discussion all the way, never lecture. You discussed things. And I remember some little fellow from the Lower East Side of New York, and I'll say something about the Jews from the Lower East Side of New York somewhere in this, because they deserve to have it said about them. But nevertheless, this little fella, he had come up in a tough neighborhood, and he made a suggestion in a hypothetical case, and he made a suggestion that included about everything from perjury to trying to influence the jury. And I'll never forget it as long as I live. Mr. Williston, who sat down during the course much of the time because he was old, but he got up and he walked forward to the front of the platform. He pointed his finger at this student. He said, "Young man, no honest lawyer would ever think of such a thing." And I've never forgotten that. I think perhaps Mr. Williston did more for the ethics of that class in that one sentence. By the way, that boy went around with his tail between his legs for about 6 weeks. He had been told off.
Yeah.
But typical of Williston's method of teaching, he loved to give us hypothetical questions, and then we would discuss them. And one of them I remembered simply because it was interesting, but it was typical. He started off by saying, John was a great broad jumper. He held the county broad jump record at 22 feet and 1 inch. James said to John, "John, if you will jump across a certain ravine, I will give you $100. So John went out and he measured the ravine, and he found that it was 22 feet across and 80 feet deep. And he decided it was not worth the risk. And he turned to leave, but as he was leaving, he saw a bull approaching with its head lowered at a very rapid pace, and he suddenly realized the only means of escape was to jump across the ravine. So shouting over his shoulder, 'I accept your offer,' he jumped across the ravine, breaking his former record of 22 feet and 1 inch with a leap of 22 feet and 8 inches. Was there a contract?" And I'll say this: there are more questions in that hypothetical that you can discuss than anything I know of.
Let me end this and I'll put a new tape on here.
The first year I had procedure under Scott, I had contracts under Williston, I had first year property under the Bull Warren, I had criminal law under Livingston Hall, and torts under Magruder. I think that was it. The Bull Warren had a terrific reputation as a teacher. I never thought he deserved it. He scared us all to death. He explained to us the first day that he would not start until 1 minute after he would wait till 11 minutes after the hour to start. And at that time he would start, and he said, "If you come and the lecture has started, withdraw, do not come in." But somebody always came in, and boy did he blast them. The boy that did it was about the third day, and the boy tried to slip into a back seat. The Bull, he was a white-haired old gentleman, white curly hair, and he had a voice to fit his nickname. And he called to him, he said, "Young man, come forward. I want to talk to you." And the boy started up the aisle. He said, "Young man, what is your name?" And the boy told him. He said, "And where are you from?" And the boy said, "Washington." He said, "Is that the state of Washington?" "Yes." tell me, young man, when you came to Harvard this fall, did you buy a round-trip ticket? And the boy said, why, yes, sir, I intend to go home Christmas. You don't need to wait for Christmas. Go on home now. And he meant it. He wasn't kidding about it.
And he threw him out.
He threw him out, yeah. I remember the bull had, he had his white list and he had his black list. If you made a particularly brilliant recitation, you'd go on the white list. And if you made a particularly dumb one, you'd go on the black list. And I was called on 3 times that year, and the first time I went on the white list. I really shone that day. The second time, I was not so good. He took me off the white list. The third time I will never forget. That was the time I went on the black list, and the bull looked at me and he said, Mr. Beauchamp, when I first made your acquaintance in this course, I thought you were going to be an intellectual friend of mine, but you are going down, down, down. He was right. I go right down underneath the desk. He's the only man that ever scared me in class.
Yeah.
But, and I didn't think he was as good a teacher as many of them thought, but in that first year, Magruder was quite a man. He was later a federal judge, and Scott, of course, in trust was the top, and Williston was the top in contracts. That Christmas, we drove home. I think we needed it. It had been a hard fall. On the other hand, it cost me money because I went back and took the examination for a scholarship. And I was cocky enough to think I'd get it without too much trouble. And I came close. If one man had dropped out of school, I'd had a scholarship, but he didn't. So I had to pay my way. But the last 2 years I did have scholarships. I always went through missing things. I never made the law review. That was the very best in the class, but actually I came out 5th in the upper 5% of the class, so I didn't do too badly. There were lots of things that year that I remember. One with Tad, which I never forgot. I came home one day and we had a little entryway as you came in with a kitchen off of it, and the bedroom and the living room doors angled off of it. Ruby was in the kitchen and Tad was in that little entryway. As I came in, she came over and threw her arms around my leg, and she took a bite right out of the meat of my thigh, and I didn't even think, before I even thought, I had swung around, and when I hit her, it raised her about a foot and a half off the ground, and Ruby said she heard this smack, and then everything was quiet for just a few seconds, then Tad began to cry. Well, maybe it was harsh on her, but I will say this. She never did bite anybody after that. It was...
broke her.
It broke her of that. One couple I might mention, I got a letter from him the day before yesterday. Second time I ever got a letter from him in the last 38 years. Wally Steffen and his wife, he was there finishing up his PhD, and Ruby met his wife Lador, and in the Dames organization, and they got to be quite good friends. And 3 times that year, Wally and I were both so busy we didn't get together very often. We met just 3 times, and we didn't see them again until 1948 when we were driving. He was he was for many years the academic vice president of the University of Idaho, Moscow. And we drove out, stopped there to see him in 48. Made very carefully, arranged it so we could get away in about 15 minutes if necessary. And we stayed there until midnight before we left, and the same thing again in '63, and I expect if we ever see him again, it'll be the same thing. But he was the most unprepossessing man I've ever seen. He was about 5'6", weighed 120 pounds, looked so skinny he was scrawny, and had buck teeth. But he'd been offered 3 times. They offered him the presidency of the University of Idaho, and he refused it each time. One, he said the security of the tenure as the vice president was far better. But he also said the president of a university should look like the president of a university. And he said, you ought to be a prepossessing looking man. And he said, I'm not. And I always said he wasn't prepossessing till he opened his mouth, and then he was. But he was one that we were glad to meet, and we've enjoyed ever since. By the way, Jerry O'Melveny had a wife who was one of the most beautiful gals I've ever seen, and she never realized it. I've never seen anybody like her. She went downtown and got a job one time as the hostess in a tea room. And she couldn't understand why she got the job when there were so many girls there who'd had experience. But, well, we finished out that year. It was a hard year. I'll never forget, I came back to Manchester, and I felt that I needed a whole summer just to rest. And I thought the resting would do me up real good. We stayed with Ruby's mother up there and her brother. And I didn't do anything for about a week. In the second week, I didn't have any money to do anything, and I was crazy to do something. I was going, by the second week, I was through rest, and I was rested up, and I needed something. Bud came back. He was, by that time, the superintendent in charge of the Peabody factory. He came out, and he said they needed workmen down there, and he wanted to know if I would consider going down to Peabody's and working. And I said, Bud, you know I'm not very good at that sort of thing, but lead me to it. So I worked from 6:30 in the morning till about 9:30 at night doing hard physical labor, which I hadn't done for a long, long time. In the morning, they kind of got me up and they shoved me to get me started, and by the time I got home in the evening, I dropped into bed, and that was about it. But I did make some money. I got quite a lot of hours in that summer and made some money, and I found that there was some question whether Ruby could go with me the next winter, but at the last minute I found I had a scholarship, and that made the difference, and she went out with me. And I made some good friends in the faculty that year. I had Dean Morgan. I sat in a lecture course under Dean Pound, and I had Scott in Truss, and he was terrific there. But one thing I did that year, I kept a good notebook. And then at the end of the year, Morgan, each year he would give a different true-false test. And I don't know, those true-false tests were guarded terrifically, but I don't know where somebody got the back true-false test for about 8 years. And there is no better way to review a course than with a true-false test. You talk about the answers to all those questions. And anyway, I brought my notebooks home for the 5 courses, and I can't remember just what they were now. Bills and notes and trusts, and I think we had corporations under Baker that year. I don't remember what they were. Anyway, I got home and I decided I was going to make some money. They were selling outlines of courses at the university bookstore, which did not belong to the university. And I figured I could put out a better outline for all those courses, and I had all these old true-false tests to put in for evidence. And so I came home and I spent the whole summer in making making those out with what do you call it, the sheet that you put in?
Mimeograph?
Mimeographing. I mimeographed them, and I got a different color for each course, fixed them up, and they looked real nice, and I fixed a box for those and shipped them out there. And I had enough of them. If I'd sold all of them, I would have had $4,000 from a summer's work. So when I got out there, I sold some of them that fall, but of course the big time after Christmas, when they begin to get scared, they want something like that. And I figured I was going to go great guns after Christmas. And doggone it, Christmas time, the university went over to the bookstore and yanked every one of those outlines out, and they were having quite an upscuttle about them. And here I was, expecting to graduate. So I carefully put them back in the wardrobe, and time went on until it was after Easter. One day I got a note to come down and see the secretary, Mr. Dimmitt. And I figured he probably had in mind, so I went down to see Dimmitt, and he asked me about the outline. I told him, yes, I'd had them, that as long as they were selling them in the university bookstore, I thought I could too, but I said, when you rated them, I put them back, and I haven't sold any since. So he told me to bring them all down to the, he was very nice about it. He said I should bring them in, turn them in. And when we took them down, I think he was quite surprised at the number of them that I had. Actually, I only made about, I cleared about $400. It wasn't very high pay for my summer's work, but it was better than nothing. We had a great many things that happened there. Now, the second year, we got, I didn't like that first year's apartment, and I found a place quite by accident. I got sick one night, went looking for a doctor, and I saw a doctor's office and went in, and it was a Jewish doctor, Dr. Malowitz. And he was a young fella, and he told me there was an apartment upstairs. He said, go up and, he said, come back tomorrow and go up and see it. And we went back, and so we got the apartment up there. It was up on the third floor. It was quite a walk up, but it was nice. I always laughed about it. The Jewish doctor and his wife on the first floor. Miss Comerford, the landlady, lived on the second floor. Her maiden name had been Katie Mutterfee. And she had been born in Ireland and came here when she was about 16 years old. And of course, just as Catholic as she was Irish, and the Malowitzes and Mrs. Comerford didn't get along worth a nickel. And the Beauchamps, we were, us Methodists and the Lords and I, who were up on the third floor, we got along pretty well with both of them. The Malowitzes have always been a couple that were just great favorites of ours. Miss Comerford was very nice too, but she was much older and never got close to her the way we did to the Malowitzes. But they, knowing them, meant a great deal. And I remember in our senior year out there, one night I was gone, and I might mention another lady, Mrs. Costello. Her son John went to the law school. He was a year behind me. As a matter of fact, I had that apartment for another year, and I managed to to sublet it to John, and that's the way we got acquainted with Mrs. Comerford. John was a very brilliant student, an awfully nice guy too. He was terribly hard of hearing, but he ranked never less than third in the class. But Mrs. Costello, now she was older. I don't know how old she would have been, in her 50s somewhere. But I've never seen anybody that was as interested in everything as she was. And she and Ruby used to go places together. And then frequently they'd come home along about 9:30 at night and get to talking. And then Mrs. Costello, she didn't like to take that streetcar home, so she'd stay overnight with us. And I think she was as devout a Catholic as I've ever known. And, well, now, her older son, she was a widow. Her husband had been a professor at Iowa State, and he had cancer and died. And she'd had a very difficult time financially. But her older son was a Jesuit priest. Her older daughter was, she was writing radio programs for the Catholic Youth Association. Her younger daughter was a nurse and was thinking of going into orders, and John was in law school. But Mrs. Costello worried about us and our religious situation, and she used to leave little tracts around for us to read every now and then, and we always got a kick out of it because she wouldn't hurt our feelings for the world, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But Ruby had an experience one night that she never forgot, certainly. Mrs. Malowitz and Mrs. Costello and she got up in our kitchen one night when I was gone, and they talked about religion, not argue about religion at all. It was, what do you believe and why do you believe that? And no, we believe different from that. That was the type of thing. And Mrs. Costello knew the Catholic religion, and Mrs. Malowitz knew the Jewish religion. And Ruby knew the Dunkard, at least, up one side, down the other. I know that Ruby felt that she got a tremendous lot out of that night. Another thing which Ruby got a great kick out of while she was there, early in the year, in our first year, she got an invitation to go to the Harvard Dames meeting. And she said she wasn't going to go. She was, well, frankly, we were a little country boy and girl, if you know what I mean. And she felt as though she'd be out of place in a place like that. And she wasn't about to go. And I told her she was going to go. And I had just read Gone with the Wind. She was reading it, and she kept reading me little bits of it, and I had to quit working for a couple of days while I read Gone with the Wind. But if you remember one place where Rhett told Scarlett after she'd been caught in a compromising situation with Ashley and wasn't going to go to the party that night, and Rhett said, "My dear, you're going to that party if I have to plant my boot in your ever so attractive bottom every step of the way." And I used the same with Ruby and got her to the Dames organization, and that was the greatest thing that ever happened to her. She enjoyed herself in the Dames terrifically. She wound up as her second year she was secretary-treasurer. It was the wives and mothers of students. And it's a pretty snazzy organization. Second year she was secretary-treasurer, and they wanted her to be president the third year, and she didn't want to do it and didn't. But in the second year, early on, she went there, and there was a lady there, a young woman, who was obviously foreign, obviously Spanish or Latin of some kind. Ruby said she had seen her with two little children somewhere a few days before. At any rate, she was there and sitting over by herself, and everybody, of course, everybody had been there the year before, renewing acquaintances and so forth, but you know Ruby. She couldn't stand to see somebody sitting by herself, so she went over and introduced herself and took Chicha Rosamena around to meet a great many of the people. And it turned out that Chicha Rosamena, we met her husband. He was the son of a former president of Panama. The Orosamenas are one of the 5 families of Panama. They have all kinds of money and they have all kinds of power and they got everything, but I guess Chicha was just as lonesome as if she hadn't. At any rate, they have been close friends of ours ever since. We went down to Panama in '61 to see them.
Now, was her husband in law school?
No, he was in engineering, sanitary engineering. And they have been another that we have enjoyed a great deal. I hear from them every now and then. I owe him a letter now, and I should be getting it off pretty soon. But Ruby enjoyed the Dames organization, and I think it did a great deal for her. Now, another thing that was interesting in that, as an officer the last 2 years, the wife of the president of Harvard was the faculty sponsor of the Dames, and therefore once a month the officers went to her home for a meeting. And Ruby loved that woman. She was wonderful. She said she would have been just as at home at a diplomatic dinner. She had been completely at home there, and Ruby said she would be just as much at home at a little country ladies' aid society. And I always remember Ruby told about one time they were eating, or they were talking, I guess, and there was a terrific commotion upstairs, and she got up and excused herself, and Ruby said she could see through the door. She got to the bottom of the steps. She was taking them 2 at a time up there, and then everything quieted down. In about a minute, she came running down the steps, smoothed herself out, and walked in. Why can't I think of the name of the president there? He was later the High Commissioner to Germany. I have it right on the end of my tongue. I'll think of it maybe when we revise this.
McCoy?
What?
McCoy?
No.
McComb?
McCoy was, but he was, I'm not sure whether he was before or after McCoy.
Well, Elliott wasn't there.
James Bryant Conant.
Conant,
yeah. I couldn't think of Conant.
Yeah.
Yes, he was a great man, but of course I never met him, but Ruby met his wife and became very close to her and let the world know all of her.
Looking back, John, would you say the grading was fair and the testing and
The grading was very tough but fair, yes. I don't think the professors knew who you were when they graded your papers. What they did, you went to class. A professor would get to know you perhaps through talking in class, that sort of thing, and me, I was talkative. I got my 2 cents worth in all the time, and I think most of them knew me rather well. But that didn't make any difference. I mean, what you did in class made no difference in what you get as your grade. You didn't have to go to class. That had nothing to do with it. At the end of the year, you went in and you took those examinations, and they graded those examinations, and the grade you got was it. That's all there was to it. The grades numerically were very, very low always. Your top grade would be about a 74. That would be the very highest. I got 71s, and 71s put me in the upper 5%. Yes, the grades were fair, and it was tougher than Wang, but yeah, you had no complaint about it. That's the way it was.
Did the faculty apparently live well at Harvard?
Oh yes, they made money. Now, for example, was in the Depression. Samuel Williston, I think he got about $20,000 a year from, he was in an endowed chair in the law school, and he got the income from that endowment. Then in addition to that, he got $100,000 a year from a law firm in Boston there, simply for having his name on the door. If he did any work for him, he got paid extra. They tell a story that it's rather typical, except it sounds kind of as though he were cocky, and he wasn't. He was a little country gentleman, one of the nicest, quietest men you ever saw, and yet
I think we're at the end of that.